Welcome to the webinar. I'm Belle Holder, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature, and Keith and Justin will answer them live as we go through this webinar. Chaos and hidden risk, particularly today's cybersecurity threats, keep many companies from teetering on the edge of failure. And DKB's world-class framework puts business leaders back in command with a new level of transparency, superior guidance, and radically different control over technology. Keith Barthold is our CEO and founder of DKB Innovative. We are an award-winning managed IT and cyber defense firm based here in Dallas, Texas. DKB provides secure and reliable solutions for compliance, cybersecurity, and IT for global productivity-focused small and medium-sized businesses. Please welcome Keith Barthold.
Hey, y'all. I want to just open up by introducing a good friend, Justin. So Justin's the CEO and founder of TechRug. We've been working with him for many years for insurance, overall business insurance, cyber liability, our commercial crime insurance, and cyber insurance, which we're talking about today. So Justin's been working with us for many years, working with our clients. And I will say I've met a lot of people in the industry around insurance. And when it comes to IT, cybercrime insurance, thought leadership around ransomware and how to protect against that with insurance, man, Justin's the pro. So glad for you to join us, Justin.
Well, thanks, Keith. And you must have gotten my check, so I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, man. So we're just going to jump right in. And Justin, I'll turn it over to you. Kind of tell us about the threat landscape. Just, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting worse, not better, So, I guess to start off with, years ago, right? I mean, a lot of organizations thought that cyber insurance, was really for, let's say healthcare providers, large hospitals, and, large organizations, Fortune 500 companies. But I think what they're doing now, or clients are starting to realize, is that either probably someone, whether it's a family member or another business associate in your town, or you yourself have experienced a situation where, there's probably been, unfortunately, a business email compromise, a ransomware attack, or some sort of cyber crime event, and there's a lot of money and manpower, whether I think it's right or wrong, being thrown into, disrupting businesses. And, again, while I think it's unfortunate, I think with the proper security and, we'll call it layered security and, the right insurance, i.e. a cyber insurance policy, chances are you may not have to go through it. Or if you do, it hopefully will just be like maybe a tropical storm or a Cat 1 tornado and not a Cat 5 tornado. Because, when it comes to, the amount of, and you've got some statistics here that we're seeing, ransomware and cyber crime event, we're starting to see, these bad actors, getting more aggressive, Keith. So what do I mean by that? Take, for example, ransomware. The technology in terms of backups and what clients, how quick and fast they're able to restore from a ransomware attack is improving. So therefore now these bad actors now are starting to go to methods such as, going back to the organization that they breached and saying, hey, if you don't give us money, we're going to start contacting clients or patients and letting them know that we've got their social security numbers, and they'll leak the last 6 digits of the social security instead of the last 4. So, it's one of those things where even if you've got the right security, they're kind of shaming you or forcing you into, paying the ransom. And I think that, organizations have to be aware that, this solution is a two-pronged approach. It can't just be all about security, and it can't just be all about insurance. It's got to be the right security and the right insurance. So, things, Keith, probably like you can attest to that, a year or 2 years ago, things like multi-factor on remote access or EDR or segregated backups, those were considered kind of nice to haves. Now they're must haves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of those stats that we're showing, and go back to the page that we were on in 2020, we saw reported damages of cybercrime globally, like 1 trillion, which is crazy in itself, right? If you think about how much money 1 trillion is and the total damages there. But to jump 600% in 1 year, it's just wild. And with the FBI, as we mentioned here, reporting that maybe that only represents 15% of cybercrime, at least from a national standpoint. But it's just big business. It's really unfortunate that it's become this prevalent. And I think a lot of that is like with ransomware, it's just become really easy, to attack people and to hold their data and their systems hostage. It's just become a big market, right?
Yeah, and I think one thing, Keith, that people don't realize is they think a lot of these attacks are sophisticated, and they're not, right? It's almost like as a kid, when you put a fishing net into the ocean, there's bound to be a fish that'll swim through it, right? So what do I mean by that is that, they're aware that there's vulnerabilities, and by not having the proper security in place, they're just writing code to expose those common vulnerabilities like log4j, right? Or different patches, things like that. Or if you don't have multi-factor, now they're even, getting away with some devious phishing scams to get around multi-factor. So, now we've got to kind of up the ante, right? But my point is that I think a lot of people think that, wow, these people are, they're sophisticated and these attacks are really high level. I'm sure if you go after a Fortune 500 company, maybe so, right? But even kind of that pipeline thing that made the news maybe about a year ago, it was just lack of MFA, So a lot of these things can be dressed with, the proper security. And if that takes place, I think we can bring down these numbers, but it's kind of everyone getting on the same page and organizations having the budgets, to properly protect themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I agreed. What we tell clients is that it's really a shotgun approach. These hackers are developing software. They're building a business. We've seen KPIs and dashboards out there on the dark web to where they're launching this across. And, if you can launch an attack to a few million businesses and you get, 1% back, that where you have some sort of foothold, some sort of ransomware launch, that's a huge payout. I mean, we see it's clearly a huge payout with the cybercrime damages jumped up to 6 trillion this past year.
Yeah, but even the ransomware, there is ransomware as a service, right? So you can buy these vulnerabilities, for $200, right? And you can execute them. Now, again, if you get caught, right, you're in big trouble. But you can buy that stuff. It's readily available. The other thing we've seen is that there are attackers now are going to organizations and saying, hey, do you kind of want to prepay so that, if something happens, like it's really kind of getting into this weird area.
Wow.
But, it is what it is, and we just got to deal with it. So.
Yeah, it's wild, and the threat's definitely rising. So let's just jump into, what is cyber insurance? Let's start there.
Yeah, it's a good question. Cyber insurance is basically, what an organization has to, kind of pay attention to and why they would need it is, it's the unauthorized access for the most part. Kind of the first group is looking at, it's usually centered around something around PHI. When I say PHI, it's protected health information. And when I say PII, it's personally identifiable information. But, most organizations start out by taking a cyber policy because, they want, if there is unauthorized access, somebody that shouldn't get into the system that gets into the system and exposes or grabs that data, the state of Texas or where I'm at Ohio, there's reporting provisions that you have to do, right? You got to provide credit monitoring, maybe a year or 2 years. You obviously have to notify people. It oftentimes will call for forensics to investigate, well, how'd they get in, right? We want a detailed report. There could be PR associated with that breach. And, if you're make the news or the paper, you want to make sure that you've got a PR team. So a lot of organizations really start out with taking out a cyber policy for the unauthorized access or to protect, that personally identifiable information. If it is exposed, you just have to comply with state laws or else you're subject to regulatory fines and penalties. But Keith, a lot of people now, what they're really worried about and what cyber insurance protects against is the ransomware we talked, but also, the business email compromise or the social engineering, getting tricked into sending money to someone they shouldn't have. And that's really the components of why people, generally want to take out a cyber insurance policy and what it's meant to do. It's meant to protect that information. It's meant to protect you against the ransomware attack, i.e. paying the ransom, business interruption that might come through that, what we would call computer hardware replacement or bricking coverage if that hardware is destroyed. And then the last one is that cyber crime where it's, when we say a first party would be a cybercrime where you're taking advantage of the policy because you got tricked into sending money or there was a business email compromise within your organization.
Okay, gotcha. Bell, this would be a great time to put a poll up there and just ask our attendees, do you have cyber insurance? And we'll take a minute. You guys attending can.
Keith, while they're doing that, Justin, can you tell us what the difference is between first-party insurance and third-party insurance?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first party means that the organization taking out the insurance coverage will benefit from the policy. So to use a ransomware attack, if your organization gets hit with a ransom and you need to pay the ransom and there's business interruption because of that, that would be a first party claim. A third party claim would be if a client of yours comes at you because you transmitted a virus, right? Or you were subject to a business email compromise that got them to they were tricked into sending money to you based on a bogus email. So third party would be clients coming at you for the protection. First party is you taking advantage of the policy yourself.
Gotcha. And while we're finishing up this poll, Justin, I hear a lot of times people say, we don't need cyber insurance because we've got an IT company and they carry cyber insurance. Is that true, false?
Yeah, it's false. So, I think, an IT company in this relationship, I guess I'll use a medical analogy, Keith. If you have a knee surgery, you go to the hospital and the surgeon rents out the surgery room for the surgeon for them to perform knee surgery in that room. If you get wheeled up to that hospital on the second or third floor and they put you into hospital bed and you get an infection in your knee, that's a hospital problem. That's not the surgeon's problem, right? So in other words, the IT service provider kind of controls their planet and what goes wrong. In terms of, when you go to, when you're outside the IT organization and you're dealing with vendors like Microsoft or Google, if something happens while your data is in their custody and control, you're subject to the terms and conditions of Microsoft and Google, so they're not going to be very advantageous for the consumer. So, you need to make sure, and I know we might get into this, like what to look out for, but if you've got data that's in the cloud with a third-party vendor, you better check your cyber policy and make sure that you have coverage if that data is either exposed or corrupted while it's in the care, custody, and control of a third-party provider. Because if not, you could be in big trouble. Plus, a lot of organizations, you've got to deal with just a staff mistake or a rogue employee. So there's a lot of moving parts. What happens if you log on to a device that isn't being monitored by the IT service provider and, somebody's able to access your system, because of that? That's not the IT service provider problem. That's a you problem. So there's just a lot of moving parts and things that can go wrong.
Yeah. And I know what we see out there, right, is our job as a managed services provider, managed security services provider, is really to inform our clients of risk, right? And knowing that, being secure at Fort Knox level and spending all your profits to that level is the wrong answer. But to be at Joe's tire shop level is the wrong answer as well. Business owners have to make that decision, like how secure is secure enough. And there will always be risk because you don't have an unlimited budget. You're not going to put it to Fort Knox level.
Yeah. And I think, you use a home analogy. We see that on home insurance, where, I would ask you, I don't, but do you have flood insurance? You're probably going to say no, because you're not worried about it. You're self-insuring it because you don't feel like the risk is that great. So organizations absolutely make calls and they self-insure it. I think that we're getting to the point, where these insurance carriers a year ago, they would put up with some stuff. They don't put it up with it anymore, right? So if you're not doing 9 kind of common things, again, we addressed it in multi-factor and, EDR, which is endpoint detection response, backups, security awareness training. If you don't have certain things in place, Keith, anymore, you're just not going to achieve a good standalone cyber policy that will do what you want it to do if things go wrong.
Yeah.
So the organization really doesn't have a call anymore if they're going to obtain the cyber insurance. The carrier is going to tell you what their minimum security standards are. And if you don't meet them, you don't get the policy.
It makes sense. Yeah. And we'll get into some of that later, into some specifics there. So our attendees can understand, what are some specific actions they need to take here. All right. So we'll keep moving along. So how has cyber insurance changed? You spoke to this a little bit, Justin, about how previously it was like, okay, I'm not a hospital, I'm not a bank, I don't need cyber insurance. Like, how are you seeing that move in a completely different direction to where right now it looks like just pretty much any business that has a computer is, maybe not a computer, but a network, and is providing certainly services to their clients using technology, or most common, just operating their own business and getting those efficiencies out of IT. It looks like they need cyber insurance.
Yeah, I mean, if you're connected to the internet, you need cyber insurance, right? Because these attackers, they look for vulnerabilities. They're not really, I mean, again, there is a select group that's going after a specific, maybe power plant or financial institution, don't get me wrong. But a lot of them out there, they're looking for common vulnerabilities. They don't care whether you're an accounting firm, an architect, an engineer, a nonprofit, they're going to try to hit you, again, I saw, I think on that poll that, it was like 2/3 and 1/3 don't have a cyber policy. When we get into a claim, I mean, I've had people that don't have cyber insurance, Keith, and when they call us, they've always said, hey, use me as a testimonial, right? Because when they get hit and they don't have cyber insurance, I don't think people understand. For example, the payment method is digital currency, whether that's Bitcoin, whatever it may be. I don't think people understand how hard it is if you aren't set up to go out and get Bitcoin to pay these people, right? And then you've got to work on, replacing hardware, and, with all the supply chain issues, that's not as easy as it was, 2 and 3 years ago. So, you're buying an incident response plan with a cyber policy, right? You're buying a panel list of vendors that are here to help you that, have gone through this with the insurance carrier. And so, one guy, we had a manufacturer's rep, I think they did like $20 million in revenue. They were down 3.5 weeks. They lost 15% of their client base because they couldn't get to them. And they just said, we're not going to put up with it. They'll do it for a day or two, the clients will. But when you're getting into a week and 2 weeks and they want answers and they can't get it, they just move.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of the scariest, toughest situations that we've ran into is having a conversation with a prospect, with a client that's come to us and said, hey, we got introduced to you. We're having a major issue here. We think that we've been compromised. We think someone's living off the land and pumping our data out. I'm starting to see things encrypt. And my first question is, do you have cyber insurance? And that's a really tough conversation when it doesn't exist. When you start talking about the cost of recovery, the forensics, all of the things that need to follow.
Yeah. I mean, it's, we always tell clients too. I mean, some people ask us, well, why is cyber insurance so important? And my answer is, unplug your network tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock and turn it on back on at 5 and tell me how your day goes. Because if you don't have cyber insurance and somebody that can come to you, i.e. the fire department right away, and you have to spend 2 weeks like that, it's not a fun 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, we can do that test for anybody that wants us to, show up at the beginning of the week and unplug their network and see how that works out for them.
I actually did I have one guy, just as a funny story, and the client said, let's try it, right? And he said to the client, I've only had one because I told our IT service providers a lot, just tell the client if you don't think security is important or insurance, and do it. And the client said, hey, let's see what it's like. And I don't know if it was buddy or whatever, but he said he called him at 11 o'clock and said, okay, joke's over. Can we go? So he had to turn it back on. Yeah.
I think we all really downplay how important technology is in our day-to-day lives, and certainly operating a business. It's just critical. It's at the very center of how we operate. That wasn't the case 20 years ago, but it certainly is now.
And I think it's great. Like, all the data is in the cloud, right? And it's always super convenient. And, the 5 years ago or 10 years ago when the server's in your office and it's all that sort of stuff. There definitely are conveniences. I mean, you can lose your iPhone, go to Best Buy, and boom, you've got all your data there. But also, it's if it is hit, it really takes down the whole business, and that's the downside to it.
Yeah. So let's get into how it's changing and why cyber cost is increasing. I mean, Justin, we're seeing premiums jump in some cases, 4x, right? A 400% increase from last year to this year. And certainly additional exceptions, there's just a huge change in the market, and it feels like it's all happening here, within the past 2 years, and especially this year. Like everything's changing. Maybe you can talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think the insurance carriers, they weren't maybe necessarily asking the right questions or looking for the right things. Also, with any type of new product, because cyber insurance is relatively new, the underwriters don't have their arms around it, right? There isn't enough actuarial data, kind of the law of large numbers. So, they're kind of guessing a little bit, right? And, I think that's what's going on. And then, I mean, you can Google, cyber insurance claims, and you'll see that, for every dollar the carriers collecting, they're paying out $2 and $2.50. So they can't continue to go off or to operate like that. They can do it maybe for a year. The other thing is Keith, a lot of these policies are fairly broad in coverage. They do a lot of things. So they didn't expect the invoice manipulation endorsement on your policy to work the way it did, right? So there's some of that. There's one thing that we talked about. Even the ransom with all that's going on. A lot of carriers now. I just read this the other day, where several of them are going to co-insurance. And what co-insurance means is that you're going to participate in the loss. So if the ransom is $1 million and you've got a 10% co-insurance clause in there, then you're going to be on the hook for $100,000. So they're asking now policyholders. I would stay away if you could from policies like that, because there's still other carriers that aren't doing that. Mm-hmm. But they're trying to kind of recoup some of the losses that they've had. So I think it really just comes down to, operationally in business, how these companies operate, they're paying out more than they're collecting, and that's a big problem. So a lot of them are, investing into things like, a lot of AI when it comes to external surface scans and monitoring not the production environment, but the outside where attackers would look to get into, your organization. They're spending money on that to kind of keep claims down. But that's really what's just driving the increase, is that, it's a very lucrative business for these bad actors, and the insurance companies aren't collecting enough and they're paying out too much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've heard you say it before, Justin, that's that, if I call up my homeowner's insurance and I let them know, like, hey, I want to increase my policy. I need a really good policy in here. And I'm shopping around, and half of the houses in my neighborhood have been broken into. And I let the insurance carrier know, hey, and by the way, I've got somebody trying to break into my house every single day, which is what we're seeing, right? Yeah. How are they going to respond? Do you think your insurance is going to go down, or is it going to go up?
Right. It's just, and I think from a technology standpoint, right, it just, for organizations that are looking at security, it really just takes a layered approach, right? And I think that, not only with you guys and continuing to, make it more difficult for these bad actors, but I think, the cyber insurance carriers now are kind of doing their portion, with these, 24/7, they're almost an MSSP, Keith, in some ways, and mm-hmm. what they're doing for the policyholders.
So maybe speak a little bit to the application process and how that's changing. What are you seeing there? I mean, it certainly doesn't sound like these applications have gotten easier.
Yeah, no, it's definitely more difficult. I think some of the carriers now are getting into a trust but verify, so they might ask for proof that multi-factor is in place. And some of them, Keith, are almost using kind of EDR agents. So, they might team up with a specific vendor and use agents to kind of monitor some stuff. So, that's kind of the change to me is that, yeah, the application and what they're asking is they're requiring more, but, they're also, it's a trust but verify. They're looking for the verification. So it might be via screenshots, but then they're also doing their own verification and, kind of doing some, not only external monitoring, but also internal.
So it almost sounds like an audit in a lot of cases, right? That to qualify for insurance, or at least to qualify for the good insurance, you almost have to go through an audit. It's more difficult, and it makes sense, right? If you're buying insurance and it's a one page with 5 questions, it's probably not going to be very good insurance, right? Or it's going to be crazy expensive. Is that what you're seeing out there with the carriers?
Yeah, I mean, our rule of thumb when we tell clients is the more difficult the barrier to entry is, the better the policy is. Yeah. If you're being asked 2 or 3 questions, you probably don't have the best policy. Yeah. And a lot of people, don't really realize that, until they get into a claim situation. One of probably the bigger mistakes is, staying away from add-ons on your professional liability insurance or onto your business insurance. Those policies or those coverages on those policies, they're just not comprehensive enough, Keith. So, you really need to go through a thorough underwriting process and purchase a standalone cyber policy. And a lot of these carriers now are doing some neat stuff where they'll have, in their portals, they'll have, incident response plans, right? They'll have some stuff that's really advantageous for the policyholders. So, it's just another thing to take advantage of.
All right.
So guys, we have a question from one of our attendees. Do verticals matter when it comes to getting cyber insurance? Does it matter to have a broker with healthcare or construction or technology background / expertise?
Yeah, I mean, I'd first of all, if it's going to be a cyber policy, I'd make sure that they have a cyber background or expertise. Verticals do matter. Take, for example, municipalities. They're having a hard time getting insurance right now. I mean, 90 to 95% of that market and those carriers have dried up. I think you brought up construction. We've seen a huge increase in construction because a lot of them always thought, hey, our people are out in the field. There's not much of an office presence. They don't really need the technology. We just had a guy and we had sent him a quote in February. He held on to the quote and didn't do anything. And in March, he called us and they wired $100,000 to someone they shouldn't have, So we've seen a huge leap. I brought up construction. I don't know if the person asking it, but we've seen a huge increase in construction. It used to be a year ago, they weren't asking for MFA on email and remote access. They are today, They weren't asking certain things to be encrypted. They are today. So I think to answer your question, vertical does matter. And I would get with somebody that specializes and does this day in and day out because, in any type of business, right? I mean, we use medical. I mean, you can't be a really good knee surgeon. You can't be a really good brain surgeon. You can't, be a really good ear, nose, and throat, right? I mean, you go to a specialist, because they know that vertical or they know that, whatever ailment you might be suffering from, they know it extremely well, and so cyber really calls for getting with a specialist. If you're going to buy auto insurance or workers' comp, go to a generalist, you're fine.
Who needs cyber insurance? I guess, we sort of answered part of this question early on, but we see the move for small to medium businesses, like it's there. I guess when we go back, go back 5 years ago, go back 10 years ago, we brought up, maybe I don't need cyber insurance unless I'm a bank or a hospital, but that trend is certainly changing. And we're seeing now where SMBs, even more than the enterprise, are investing in cyber insurance. I would sort of put it this way, and I love this quote. Every morning in Africa, a gazelle wakes up and knows it must outrun the fastest lion or will be killed. Every morning in Africa, a lion wakes up, knows it must run faster than the slowest gazelle or it will starve. It doesn't matter whether you're the lion or a gazelle. When the sun comes up, you better be running. Like we're seeing this, that the industry has changed to a point that it is very easy for cybercrime to occur. You had mentioned, Justin, that for a few $100s, you can buy this. I mean, you can certainly research. You can get on YouTube, study on it, and certainly tap into the dark web and get ransomware as a service. And we're seeing criminals investing in this to where it is not the fastest gazelle that is getting attacked by the lion. It's not the banks. Those are the ones that you hear about, right? The banks, the pipelines, the big ones. What you don't see in the news is that it's the slow and it's the weak that are getting picked off. The small and medium businesses that just aren't investing in it, either because they can or they really choose not to invest in cybersecurity. Are you seeing the same thing out there?
100%, yeah. It's again, they don't really care what industry, what size you are. They're looking at vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it's just everyone's a target at this point, and you're especially a target if you're running behind the pack and you're not making cybersecurity priority. So let's talk about what's included in cyber insurance. Like cyber insurance, really just unpack that for us, Justin, because our audience probably, hopefully they've never gone through this. They've never gone through a ransomware attack. They've never had a major cyber crime occur and been the victim of that. There's a lot of pieces in there that cyber insurance covers in it. Like, it's not just recovery. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got some good ones up here, but, to your point, when one domino falls for a lot of these, right, we'll just take the theft of PHI or PII, protected health and personally identifiable information. But if that were to happen, the state of Texas, is going to say that you have to, notify these people and you have to buy credit monitoring. So if you don't have notification or breach response costs, you're in trouble, and then you have, to bring in forensics to investigate, well, how'd they get in, what was going on, right? If you don't have that forensics, once it happens, you're going to be self-insuring that. Well, then there could also, there could be subject to a regulatory fine and penalty if you don't notify people fast enough, right? So you got to make sure that you've got regulatory fines and penalties coverage. We talked about a little about the PR, we've had to do that for clients where, we have to put out, so much amount of good PR to undo the bad PR, so, usually, like I said, even with the cyber extortion, if you get hit with a ransom, well, forensics, then you've got to deal with potential business interruption. You could have to institute the computer hardware replacement, the bricking coverage, so there's, sometimes 4 or 5 things, what we call insuring agreements, that have to, kind of come on board with the claim in order to, make you whole, before, and bring you to the point before you were, at the time of the loss. So, you need a comprehensive standalone policy. And that's kind of what we talked about a little about earlier is, you want to stay away from those add-ons for professional liability or your business insurance, because they're not going to achieve it.
Yeah. I mean, I know that we saw a case in Florida several years ago that was a medical records or a medical billing and collections company with millions and millions of patient records, right? Because that was their job, is revenue cycle, billing these patients, collecting information. They had a homemade portal that they had created, but had not done proper vulnerability management and hardening against that. So they were breached and ransomware. I know in that particular case, there was so much data and so many patients that the postage alone to notify those patients was going to be over $1 million.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they were underinsured. And in that case, actually went bankrupt. And it was a very quick bankruptcy because right off the bat, there's $1 million in postage. And we haven't even got into the PR and the reputation recovery, all of the data loss recovery and the work that needs to occur to make sure that this never happens again. Just the postage was enough to take them out because they were underinsured.
Yeah.
So sort of continuing this particular slide, let's talk about some of the things that are we talked about what was typically included here, right? What are the things that people really need to think about that typically aren't included or might be an additional cost that we need a professional like yourself to really dig into and inform us who aren't cybersecurity insurance experts to take an extra look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times if there's an event, there's a lot of times where you need employees to work overtime, and that sort of stuff is not covered, in an insurance policy. I know you put on here, like you said, future loss, some of the IP theft. Actually the typical additional cost, the nation state act of war, there's a few Lloyd's carriers now that are putting in exclusions for that. So it used to be where they would have a traditional war exclusion, like you think of war tanks and stuff like that, but there would be a carve back for cyber terrorism. And then it would say cyber terrorism means blah, blah, blah. And there was usually an exclusion, Keith, on the cyber terrorism for, religious, political, ideological. So in other words, you can't, kind of hit some of those hot button issues, if a Republican or Democrat, go either way, because it'll obviously incite someone to maybe potentially reach out and attack you. But there's actually now, some of these carriers, I'd move that nation state acts of war over the last couple of months into the typically not included. There's some that aren't doing it, so, it's, I think with the cyber insurance policies, really where I see where clients And it's not all the time, but sometimes it's, the cost associated around with the business interruption or the employees that maybe had to work overtime. That's sometimes where I think they think that the policy is going to do more than actually what it does, so that would be something that I would pay attention to. And always, before you do anything, make sure that if you've got a cyber insurance policy, that you're getting permission from the carrier to do certain things, right? And check ahead of time and don't just assume things. Because sometimes people without the insurance carrier's approval will go out and start buying additional hardware and stuff like that, or they'll rent servers or something, and you got to get carrier approval, so I think that's the other thing, is don't overstep your boundaries on these policies.
Gotcha. No, that's great information. So let's talk about application and claim denials. I know that these, with the complexity of some of these applications now, like, what are some things that our audience needs to be aware of when it comes to preventing a denial?
Yeah, and I know we have here, line. I don't know if it's line. I think sometimes a lot of our, sometimes clients will, instead of getting with an IT service provider like you, they'll say, oh yeah, I've got MFA, and maybe they have MFA on email, but not remote access, and it's asking both, right? So I think sometimes the client just assumes that they have certain security in place, but we would call it material misrepresentation, right? Where you told the insurance carrier something that wasn't true. So, I think that obviously would be your grounds for denial. With the cyber defense requirements, again, I don't think you're not going to get to first base if you don't have what they're asking on the application in place. They're going to just deny you for coverage right off the bat. Actually, if you have a claim on a previous policy, you could still get coverage. You might, pay a little bit more. Maybe sometimes it might be through the nose, right? But, you can get it. It just might be more expensive out there, and it obviously shrinks the number of markets, because a lot of times, Keith, they want to make sure that they've got a good forensic report, and they give it some time to make sure that the bad actors are actually out of the system. We've had cases where forensics people have missed it, or they've been lying dormant, and 270 days later, boom, you get hit again. So sometimes it could just have to do with some time constraints. Some carriers will kind of have like a 3-year cooling off period to make sure it's okay. So really getting down to the application, making sure that, you're getting with the appropriate parties to make sure that you've got the right security and you're answering it, correctly is extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, great. So let's talk about some of those minimum requirements, some of those cyber defense requirements that we're seeing in that sort of expanding list. We've listed here a few of the popular ones that we're certainly seeing in those applications come across. I'd like to talk just through some of these. Multi-factor authentication, the first one. I think, at least what we've seen, that's the first and most obvious. And if our audience takes nothing else away, man, like, get multi-factor authentication on everything, right? Office 365. Your VPN and even remote access into the environment, and then access to backups. We're seeing multi-factor authentication just to that point with the number of password compromises. It's like locks on your door. And certainly my homeowner's insurance, I don't know about yours, but probably would not cover me if I didn't have locks on my door. And so, anything else to add to MFA and what you're seeing there?
No, I think this list is probably a really good list. This is probably what the insurance company, some of the audience might say, wow, this is a lot. Like, this is kind of that upper echelon of getting security. I'd say a lot of this is common, and a lot of organizations out there are doing these things, because we write a lot of cyber policies and we ask a lot of these same questions, and they're getting policies. So, it kind of goes back to our original conversation where you have to make security part of your budget. You just have to.
Yeah. And so, as we mentioned before, it's almost coming from a sort of simple application of, do you have these, to can you provide us evidence of this? Almost like a miniature audit. In some cases, not so miniature. But again, you want that because it will allow you to get the best coverage, the best premiums. So let's continue kind of going down this list, this endpoint detection response, EDR. I think the key point there is that, look, antivirus alone is really dead. Traditional antivirus, the antivirus that you saw that everyone had deployed, 3-4 years ago, right? That is signature based, and we've certainly seen it be evaded in our own tests to beat up on traditional antivirus. It's very easy to get around it, to attack it, to use very advanced techniques that are just available by everyone today to evade traditional antivirus. So there's a move there to endpoint detection response, EDR. With that is 24/7 security monitoring and SOC. Just to have an EDR is not enough if there's no one taking action when it alerts. We find that the bad guy is probably not going to attack your environment at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning at the most opportune time. It's probably going to be like 2 a.m. when if you have in-house IT and don't have that sort of monitoring, haven't outsourced that, if you don't have a big enough team for that, it's going to be at a very inopportune time at night when people are asleep. And so having that additional monitoring component is really key, because it happens. If there's an attack, you've got to take action. A few others in here, just an email filtering solution. As we know, the majority of these attacks are through social engineering and through people. Email compromises occur over and over. It's someone that is clicking a link that they shouldn't, clicking an attachment, getting phished, or getting tricked into sending money to the wrong place, which if we skip one down there, that employee cybersecurity phishing training is really designed along with that email filtering solution to reduce the likelihood of being attacked there. It's creating that muscle memory over and over again. Air gap backups. What have you seen on the backups, Justin? Maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think it's really easy for us to assume that, man, I got backups. Like, why do I need cyber insurance? Of course, I'm backing up my stuff. Or is that wrong?
Yeah, no, I think two things, right? Backups sometimes fail, right? I mean, the green light's blinking that everything's good, and it's just not, right? But the other thing, we're starting to see, these and I think we alluded to it earlier, the backups are becoming so good in the technology, that this is where the cyber insurance is going to come in, because if you can retrieve from a backup and they've got data, they might go to a competitor, right? And say, hey, we've got these trade secrets, and we got information that you guys might want to know. And they'll go back to the organization and say, hey, if you don't want us to tell Coke what's in the secret solution of Pepsi, you better pay us, right? So they're forcing you to pay that ransom, or they'll just reach out to clients or patients and give them, hey, we've got your information. Here's some stuff that we shouldn't know that we know. So kind of to your point, yeah, you can have all the security, but unfortunately on our side, now they're finding other ways to get that cyber extortion or that ransom paid, because the technology is just getting so much better.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen stats showing that 70% of the ransomware attacks that occurred in the past year have included some element of exfiltration, where they're extracting that data. And that's especially important if the data that you hold is regulated. If part of this cost of recovery rising so much is because, one, the cost of forensics is there. It's much more complicated, and you're going to pay an expensive hourly rate. Certainly you don't want to be paying that out of pocket if you have to do forensics. But a lot of times that forensics is not just to tell the story of how this attack came about. It's to determine whether data was stolen or not. And so, if you're out there and you've got healthcare data, you've got DoD data, any kind of protected information, you're collecting credit card information or financial data, social security numbers, all of those protected data where there are privacy laws in place. Forensics has to determine whether that data was extracted to know whether you're going to have to then report that to authorities. And so having all of this protection in place to make sure that doesn't occur is super, super important. You can't just fall back on and go to your backups and go, well, I'm fine. I can just recover from backups. That's not enough anymore, unfortunately. A couple of last things on here are data encryption. This is certainly regulated in a lot of industries for the protection of the data. And then no legacy authentication. Having things like POP3, old authentication, SMTP, with your Office 365 environments, and these deprecated protocols that are no longer secure. Certainly, if you have those in your environment, that's a bad thing. And I know that insurance doesn't want you to have that. That's like having a broken lock on your door.
Right.
And then the last one we have here is confirmation of disaster recovery and business continuity plans. We use a term called assume breach, and that is you're getting attacked constantly, and it's best to assume not if you'll be hacked, but when you'll be hacked. So then you can build out that plan, and it's not an absolute chaotic scramble when you're attacked. And your insurance wants that, right? They want it to be organized. They want it to occur quickly and not be a crazy fire drill when you get attacked.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna go ahead.
Poll bell. We have a poll bell. Over to you.
That's what I was gonna say. Yes, we do. We have a poll. Oop, I hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. Let me relaunch it. There it is. So while that poll is going on, I have a question in the chat about how big of a team do you need to implement all these cyber defense requirements? Because when you're talking to small business, you might have one IT guy for most small businesses, and it's likely that you're related to them.
Yeah. So I guess shameless promo here for DKB Innovative and what we do, and that is a lot of co-managed IT. Realizing that if you're out there and you're an IT director, you're kind of a one-man show. This is difficult stuff. Cybersecurity is very specialized. It's complicated. There's a lot of tools involved, but there's also a lot of process involved and specialization in this. And so, if you're small, I would say, one, study up and learn as much as you can around cybersecurity, but also know that you don't have to do it alone. Yes, there's going to be an investment, but that's why firms like DKB Innovative exist, is to provide outsourcing and provide you the help you need. You wouldn't go to your family practitioner if you need a brain surgery done. There are specialties that exist. So I would encourage the small IT directors, the small groups out there, to reach out and get some help. Find a qualified managed security services provider to come in and guide you through this process and come alongside you.
And it does look like it is pretty evenly divided between some, most, and all, but no one, fortunately, on the webinar today has none of these in place. So that's a good sign.
Fantastic.
And then, Justin, when it comes to insuring a small and mid-sized business, do insurance companies like to see people work with an MSP, or are they just fine with, okay, we've implemented them?
Yeah, I don't think that I've heard that, maybe one or two of mine where sometimes they don't like it, but for the most part, I don't think they really care. So it's not really, they just want to make sure that, again, that there's maybe, certain security in place on the MSP side as well as the client side. But there are a couple out there that I'm familiar with where we've seen denials because they work with MSPs.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many MSPs out there, and I think we've seen some great ones, and we've seen some pretty rough ones, to where having an undersecured MSP that doesn't have the focus and the maturity they need with security, like it seems like that becomes a bigger risk because that MSP is certainly a target. I know we're a target, right? We're a huge target, and we have to eat our own dog food, so to speak, and make sure that we have all of these things implemented for our own business, that we're very diligent in aligning ourselves to a framework and in continuously increasing our cyber maturity, because if certainly if we get hacked, the reputation damage is incredible, but also our clients are at risk as well, since we're managing their environments. So a few more slides, and then we'll get to question and answer. I have a lot of people ask, well, where do we start? What do we do here? We know that we've got a lot of things that need to occur, and cyber security is big. It's complicated. Where do I even get started? I would offer up something like the cyber defense matrix, right? Know that it's not just about tools. Cybersecurity is not a matter of just like, let me buy as many tools as I can and throw them in here. I think that the tools are important, and having really, really good tools is critical, but it's how those tools are leveraged, how you support those, how you monitor and implement those within your system. The slide we're showing here sort of shows these, what this is in alignment to the NIST framework. And know that it's a journey. It's about taking all of your assets that are bought at the bottom: network, cloud, application, people, server, workstations, all of your IT assets. First off, knowing what do you have, because if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. It's like if you had a building and you didn't know how many doors there were on the outside or where they were at, it would be very difficult to protect the inside of the building, not knowing where the doors are. So let's identify what needs to be protected. Second is harden your infrastructure. Minimal number of administrators, reduce privileges, just like you wouldn't want everyone to have access to your payroll files. You wouldn't want everyone to be a domain administrator in your environment. And just think about IT hygiene, like vulnerabilities and reducing your attack surface, moving things to the cloud. Certainly the easy one on there is putting multi-factor authentication, some of the areas that we showed you before. Detection, right? This is the next big step. Is if you don't have the proper tools in place, and you have the process, and you have that 24/7, 365 coverage of a security operations center, it's often difficult to identify when an attack has occurred, when you've been compromised. And going back to that house analogy, if I don't have the security alarms in the house, and I don't have the surveillance, and I never know that there's a burglar in my house, that burglar can live in the closet and live off the land and wreak havoc. And we may never know. And it could stay in there for days, even months. And so the key is you want to detect that very, very quickly. And then that's what we call our boom here, our security event. After those things are detected, a real-time response. So what are you going to do? What actions will you take? Let's plan that out. Let's figure that out now, and then figure out, what does recovery look like? Who am I going to reach out to? Do I have cyber insurance? Can I get my agent engaged immediately and get into forensics? When can I do backup recovery, and map all of those things out? And so it's all about just planning and being ahead of it. And so a more complicated view of this would be classifying your defenses into this: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So using this framework, you'll notice at the bottom, back to what I was mentioning, it's not just about tools. On the left, this identification, to protect, it's more about technology. But as you develop a cybersecurity plan and a program around this, it becomes more about people and an underlying process throughout. And so what you have here is putting all of my actions and all of my defenses into the proper categories to identify where the gaps are, surface the risks, and then attack them. And so it's really about visualizing and planning around it. And then the last slide I have for you here is just to sort of show you a way that we do this at DKB Innovative through a security risk assessment. We align to the CIS framework, Center for Internet Security, which then crosswalks to those other frameworks such as NIST. And we run this with our clients and are able to identify where are your gaps, and then what is the order in which you remediate those gaps, because you're gonna lock your doors before you build a 20-foot fence and hire a armed guard and hire the dogs, right? There's an order in which you do that that is financially beneficial to your organization. And so what we do is help identify where those areas are, and then come alongside you, develop that plan and execute on it to remediate and increase your maturity. So with that, I'll just hand it over to Belle if we have any remaining questions in the chat.
We've gotten most of them answered. We did have one left, and that was, is there an industry that is more targeted or might cost more for cyber insurance?
Yeah, I think that, the standard financial, healthcare, retail is another one that's, point of sale type stuff. Those are kind of the higher targets. But again, even, a couple of years ago, construction was extremely cheap, in terms of the cyber premiums. They're not, it's not anymore. So, I think we're seeing costs go up across the board because, the targets of some of the ones that we're talking about, the financial, the point of sale, the financial, or I'm sorry, the healthcare, it's becoming where it's almost saturated, right? And so they're going after, they're kind of expanding the net on who they're going to attack and who they're going to look at. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Justin, for joining us today. And
I'm really excited. I got to hop on a claims call. So, all this stuff, right? I got to hop on with the claims team to go over something. So,
excellent. Well, thank you so much, Justin. We appreciate you joining us. And if you guys have any questions, you'll be receiving an email with the slide deck information in it too. Thank you for joining us today. And I hope you have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, Justin. Bye.